Hello and welcome to Landy's Crypto Corner. Today is June 28th, 2024, and today is a pretty important day, or well, yesterday was. Friday's closure was a pretty important day. We are now in the Saturday candle, even though it still is Friday for me. Bitcoin closed the daily, 2-day, 3-day, 4-day, and 5-day time frames. But we're going to look at the daily to start with here, and we are going to take a look at where Bitcoin has been hanging out, and that's generally the same area as the last time that I spoke to you in recorded format, at least. In this case, Bitcoin is still closing candles above this 60,150 wick low of the first higher low of the prior uptrend. Now, Bitcoin has a lot of work to do, as I've mentioned in the past. It has to put in a low, and then it can get at least started with a bounce or a wider bounce. We have seen some chop down here on the lower term timeframes and on the daily in and around this October of 2021 monthly close around that 61,350 area. Now, if Bitcoin can bounce up and close a daily candle above 62,500 here, which is this top side wicks of the daily candles, then we would see this low solidified as a valid swing low on the daily time frame. Of course, this is a swing low and a closing low on the lower term time frames, but that needs to be solidified as a wick low, swing low area. And then we need the closing low to be in. That's only really going to happen on closes above 62,500. So if we do see that, then I would be looking for further upside somewhere around 63 to 63 and a half, which is the top side of that prior uptrend's first higher low that got started back here in the first part of May. So this was a little while ago at this point. Above there, I would target the lower high here on a close open basis at $64,000 to that wick high and April of 2021 monthly swing high there at $65,000. If Bitcoin can start closing back in this zone, which is the all-time high swing zone or wick zone from the prior cycle, then we can start entertaining moves up to somewhere around this lower high on the daily at 66,500 to the wick high there at 67,275. Of course, this is the next or the first major lower high of the ranges I've explained before, which was, the big uptrend. We had higher lows through here. If Bitcoin broke down from 65, we were looking for lower lows into support. We did see that with the first big lower high from 67 to 72. And then we saw the lower low deviation of this big closing all-time high range, with the bottom side coming in from March of 2021, which is a monthly and quarterly closing high at $58,800 to $59,000 or so. So, Bitcoin bulls have some work to do here. It's just kind of chopping around, going sideways. And the bears are kind of on the clock at this point. If they don't push things down below $60,000 again and start getting daily closures or at least meaningful time frame closures below the daily, like a 4, 6, or a 12-hour, then I'd be looking for things in general to go sideways and up and try to set that daily low above 62.5. Anywhere below $60,000, it is game on for the bears. I would be looking for tests back down to this local moves wick low, which is coming in on a closing basis, of course, at that 60,200. If we start breaking below there, then, it's fair game all the way down to that March of 2021 monthly closing area at 58.8 to 59, and down to the current wick low of the move at 58,400 or so. Anywhere below there, I'm looking for the deviation close open to get hit around 58,300 to the actual swing low of this entire range at 56,500. Now, I've mentioned this before. If Bitcoin does do that, it can safely swing this area as long as it closes back above 56,500 and then begins getting daily closes back above this entire zone and the top side specifically here at 61,500. And that would be above the October 2021 monthly close at that 61,500, and of course go and take out that 62,500 area. So that is kind of the criteria. To break the downtrend, Bitcoin's got to break 67,274 from here. likely what we're probably looking at is like a bounce to another lower high. Then it's game on. It's another lower high, so it's still a downtrend if that does occur. And then we look for, a possible higher low or equal lows that goes and takes out whatever that lower high would be. That's like the most likely statistical scenario from here. But, we can't rule out that Bitcoin can't just green candle its way up and take out 67,275 if the low area here does hold. So let's take a look a little bit deeper into the daily chart here with momentum. This is stochastic momentum. This is close over close price momentum, not Stoch RSI in this case. This is just a regular Stoch. Stoch RSI measures the velocity of RSI, whereas the regular Stoch measures that close over close momentum. And in this case, the pivot is at 59,372. As long as Bitcoin's trading above there, you will see this oscillator pointed to the upside, and in general, that would provide for pressure up. And when we look at the actual RSI, when we do see a low being set here, so above 62,500 or so, this will this indicator, the RSI indicator that I'm using, should put in a little triangle here, and that will denote that the low is in. Obviously, we know that anyway by getting closes above 62.5, and that would provide for some hidden bullish divergence between the lower low and this current low should it hold. Now that would also, above 62,500, that would also put it above the bearish control zone here, which is coming in at 61,450, and above the simple moving average, which is, it's like a soft buy signal. Of course, you want to see regular bullish divergence, not hidden bullish divergence for a more powerful trend changing move. And you usually want to see multiple drives. In this case, this would at least be good for a start of a bounce. So keep an eye on that over the weekend. Now, the other big thing with the daily, before we get into some of the higher term time frame closes that occurred, would be the Bollinger Bands, which is a metric for measuring volatility. And Bitcoin can safely come down and retest that lower second standard deviation. As long as it's not losing it at 59, that's $59,000 even. As long as it's not closing below there, then I'm not looking for a more aggressive expansion down. It can wick into that area as long as it's getting bought back up into this zone, specifically above $59,000 in this case. Then, it can test down there, closes down there, look bad for the bulls. We're going to go test lower. Wicks down, not really anything different than what we have been seeing. If Bitcoin can close above the lower first standard deviation, which you can see is coming in at the October 2021 monthly closing high zone here, that is at 61,350. Of course, we need to see it. That is encouraging, but we need additional criteria or confirmation of a low being set above that 62,500 still. And you can see the basis band of the Bollinger Bands, which is just a 20 simple moving average. And this is coming in at around 64,500. So again, a little bit at a time above the 62,500, looking 63 to 63.5 over here, top side of this higher low, to 64 at the closing lower high here, to around $65,000 in general. When moving on to some of the higher term timeframes, like the 2-day, we can see that the 2-day did close right on, the prior 2-day closure came right on that lower second standard deviation that has moved down. And again, we're looking at around 59,500 to 600 here. If Bitcoin's closing the next 2-day candle above it, good. Likely going to see it bounce up a little bit further. The lower first standard deviation is there at $63,000 above there. We got some room up to that $65,000 overhead resistance, possibly even to the basis band there at 66,300. Closures below there would be additional pressure down in a more volatile fashion. Excuse me. To go test that lower low structure and possibly lower than the swing low at 56,500, right? Anywhere below there on a longer term time frame like this is going to start looking like Bitcoin's going to come down to the $53,000 weekly swing high from 2021 that it found resistance at earlier this year, to that $50,000 to $52,000 closing structure. These were closing highs rather on the weekly from October of 2021 and December of 2021, respectively, that Bitcoin had found prior support earlier this year on. So keep that in mind. The other thing to pay attention to is the Stoke momentum indicator on the 2-day. The pivot is $60,000. So as long as Bitcoin is closing above there, coming into the next 2-day closure, then this will switch to full-on pressure to the upside from, an extreme read in the oversold zone. That does not mean that price can't test lower. As long as it's closing above the pivot at $60,000, then we would get the K and the D read both pointed up in the oversold zone. That in and of itself isn't a signal either. We still need to see structure built. We need to see lows put in, and then subsequently, breaking the current daily downtrend at least, and then putting in some higher lows or equal lows from there. But it is encouraging for the bulls, or it's a point in the bulls' court, I should say, in this case. And, the same thing goes for hidden bullish divergence. The last big lower low structure for RSI is the current lowest low of the price range here. And you can see that RSI is currently well below there. So if we do see a low coming in above, 58,300 on a close and 56,500 on a wick, that would provide for another drive of hidden bullish divergence from within this range. So, good for a bounce up again, and then come back to it later for structure to be built. 3-day, we've got Bitcoin just in a larger overall volatility range between the lower second standard deviation, which was tested back here on the initial push down of this move down into that 58,400 area. It has moved up a little bit to around that 58.8 March monthly and quarterly closing high. So, that area is still available to be tested as long as Bitcoin is trading and closing 3-day candles below the lower first. If the daily starts to get above there, then we're seeing the etchings of a bounce on the daily as it relates to the 3-day chart. In this case, 62,100 is the lower first. Above there, we'd be looking somewhere around the basis and the overhead resistance, 65 to 65.5. And of course, above there, we're looking right back to the prior cycle all-time high by the upper first at $69,000. And above there, the top side of this volatility range is at around 72,750, almost $73,000. Of course, then we're just looking at the all-time high. Closures below the lower second would be expansion down at minimum into the bottom side lower low structure on a wick basis at 56,500. Any further expansion or breakdown from there on a closing basis would provide for that move down to 53 to 50 initially, and then we come back to it. Any breaks above the upper second, of course, at around 73, we're looking at the all-time high at 73,835 to 75 to 78, 78 to 80, mid to low 80s from there. And we can move on to take a look at momentum. It is getting into the bearish control zone of the Stochastic indicator here. The momentum pivot is at $66,000. So if we did happen to see any 3-day closures above there and we still haven't broken the daily downtrend, it would provide for some more medium-term time frame below the weekly pressure up. So that would at least be good for the bulls in that case. Let's go ahead and look at the 4-day. We're already on the Stochastic momentum chart. Pivots at $69,000. So prior cycle all-time high. Not looking too great right now on RSI. Still headed down. Bitcoin, of course, testing its lower second standard deviation of this expanding range. We're not in an expansion phase just yet. Below the current wick low, though, it would go into expansion on the 4-day chart. So that would be your 58,400 by the lower second. You can see above the current overhead resistance at 61,350. There is the 4-day lower first standard deviation. If we do start seeing dailies close above there, and especially 4-day closures above there, then we start eyeing that $65,000 area again by the 4-day basis. And then, of course, above there, $68,000 to $69,000 by the current 4-day pivot and the prior cycle all-time high by the upper first standard deviation and the overhead resistance there. And then above there, we're just looking at the range highs again, $72,500 to $73,000 or so. Anywhere above there, we're looking to the all-time high and higher, just like the 3-day chart. The next interesting chart to look at in this regard is the 5-day. The 5-day, we're looking at Bitcoin getting a closure below. It did get the 5-day closure below the lower second ever so slightly. So, a retest of that lower second, which is very close to price action right now, is around 59,700 or so. If we do see a 5-day closure below there, in between timeframes can wick down, no problem. But in this case, any closures below, we're looking for expansion to actually kick off to the downside, targeting the lower low structure down by the lower third at 56,500. Any breakdowns below there, we're looking for expansion, $53,000 to $50,000 initially. If Bitcoin can close dailies again, just like on the other timeframes, dailies, and then of course coming into a 5-day closure, get a 5-day closure above the lower first here at around 62,600. If it closes a daily above 62,600, then we're looking at a daily low being set. And then we can reference, some of the volatility metrics in some of the other timeframes that I just looked at. They're all coming in at like 65 to 65.5 by the April of 2021 monthly swing high at $65,000. So above there, 68 to 69. Above there, we're looking, $72,500 to $73,000 again. And then above there, the all-time high and higher. And that's something to really pay attention to. We do have, Bitcoin is likely looking to play down to the edge of the bearish control zone of a Stochastic momentum indicator like this one. And the pivot is at 68,500 now. So, if we start seeing a bounce coming into next week on the daily, we see a low being set and we see like the 2-day, 3-day start getting that upward pressure. And then we subsequently see a downtrend break. Well, then the 5-day is likely going to follow through with all of that. And we're looking at, that structure being built along with momentum shifting to the upside, and then start eyeing some of those higher targets within the overall range that Bitcoin's in, and then eventually a breakout from there. If we do start to see that happen this next week, I think that's kind of the time frame that bulls would want this to happen. Although, sideways price action is going to benefit bulls right now versus the bears at this particular moment. So even going sideways is going to be more preferential than going down, of course, for the bulls in this case. Now, we have a big weekly, monthly, 2-month, quarterly, and 6-month closure coming up. I will actually be making a video after the weekly close to address, of course, the additional closures of the monthly, 2-month, quarterly, and 6-month. That is going to be on Monday. That's going to be a longer video, so please make sure that you are following and you got alerts set, because that one's going to be probably a pretty darn important one for gauging where things are going to go through the next quarter. But we can get a preview of the weekly here. Weekly lower first standard deviation is where you want to see Bitcoin closing above. So Bitcoin is currently trading above it right now. This is at 59,600. You do not want to see closures below this. That would indicate that Bitcoin is stepping down its range of volatility in terms of targets. It would still have to break down from supports, but it would give it the ability to head down to swing at minimum this 56,500. You can see the lower second is coming in at 54,500. It is possible, excuse me for the coughing. It is possible that if Bitcoin does stay right here and close kind of sideways, that it gets a close above the lower first, and then we see the lower first get above price action. I'll discuss that on Monday. But that actually would likely pull the lower first up into the bottom side wick of this overall range at around 56,500. And then if it tests and that area holds up, that's actually one of the perfect bounce setups for the weekly. So it's only if it closes the weekly under the lower second do we start looking at that as being a problem. In this case, it's actually, even though it's not very bullish right now, it can very quickly change in terms of structure in that regard. Now, I will say that you still want to see Bitcoin, and it's preferable for bulls to want to see Bitcoin closing at minimum the weekly above the last higher low on a closing basis at 61,500. So that is important for some other things that we're going to talk about on Monday, but as long as it's above 56,500 on a wick basis on closes, we're looking at this just being a consolidation period and an accumulation period. So yeah, that's what I'm going to leave you with. I guess actually I should check on the pivot for the weekly. This is about to dive out of the bullish control zone. That's not exactly bullish. 68,700. So right by the prior cycle all-time high. But we'll address all of this stuff and follow up with this on Monday. You have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. And of course, as always, stay safe and have a wonderful weekend. And I'll come at you again here in the same format, just a little bit longer on Monday. With all of that said, Landy out. Take care.